Hi, I'm John Byrne with Poets and Quants. Welcome to our Thought Leadership Series with the Graduate School of Management at UC Davis in California. We are exploring the ideas, the passions, and the motivations of some of the school's senior faculty. And with me today is Michele Yetman, who has been at the school as a professor in accounting for 20 years, started teaching at the University of Iowa. She has an MBA from Texas A&M. And her PhD was earned at UNC at Chapel Hill. Welcome.
Oh, thank you.
So what made you become an academic?
That is a good question.
I know you liked being a student.
I did like being a student. You know, it was kind of funny because I didn't actually do that well in high school or even my first year in college. But then I kind of figured it out after that, and I started doing really well. And I realized that you spend a lot of time at your job. I mean, if you really think about there's only a few things in life that matter. Your bed, you spend a lot of time in bed, your job, and the people you spend time with, your partner,
Right.
your friends, right?
Yeah.
Your family. So along those lines, I really started thinking about how I wanted to spend my time. And I wanted to pick a career. I didn't want a job. I wanted a career. I wanted something I was passionate about. And the idea of lifelong learning really appealed to me. Mm-hmm. My second year in college, I started becoming a lot more curious and a lot more into personal development, always wanting to sort of improve and learn, and academics went in line with that.
Another reason, why accounting after that?
That's also a good question. So I actually was initially attracted to accounting because I was really good at it. It was really natural. I really struggled my first year in college because I went out and had a little bit too much fun. But accounting really clicked with me. Like, most of the other students were struggling in the class, and I'm like, this just clicks with me.
Wow.
I think it really spoke to my sort of analytical side, my left brain, my sort of need for like balance. And that's initially why I got into it. In the long run, I worked as an accountant for several years after my undergraduate degree. And I did find that it was pretty boring to be a corporate accountant. You do the same thing every month, you do the same thing every quarter, and that wasn't too exciting. But I also did learn that accounting really wasn't as much of a science as I thought it was. There was a lot more art in it, a lot more uncertainty, and I was very curious about that. And I really, when I was an undergraduate, I did some teaching in accounting, some tutoring, and I really, really loved teaching. And so, I loved accounting, and so I just really wanted to share that with students. So
Makes
I ended
sense.
up going into accounting, yeah.
So you go off to UNC to get
Right.
your PhD.
Right. Mm-hmm.
The first deep dive you do in research is obviously your PhD dissertation. What did you study?
Yeah, so I was at UNC, and they were fairly mainstream in the research. Most of the faculty there at the time did empirical financial research, mostly on the typical mainstream research, which was corporations looking at stock prices and accounting information. So I sort of followed along that line, being trained there, doing empirical financial research, looking at stock prices and accounting information. My dissertation actually has nothing to do with what I do now. It was on, and I'm glad I can laugh and smile about my dissertation now because it was a tough road for me. I went into a big pond where a lot of people were doing research, and it overlapped heavily with finance, very, very technical area. I went into valuation. So I looked at IPO firms, initial public offering firms, and I was trying to understand the anomalies that went on with them, which was initially they're underpriced, and when they first go to market, there would be a huge run-up on the first day, and then the next 3 years after that, they underperform. So I was trying to understand those anomalies by looking at initial public offering firms and comparing them to seasoned firms at that time to try to figure out what their price should have been at the public offering based on that, to try to predict the underpricing and the long run underperformance.
Right.
And I was able to do it. However, I was too timid to put my paper out on the web on SSRN, and sure enough, I got scooped by some big name finance people.
Oh.
And I did not get my dissertation published,
Yeah.
which was incredibly painful because I spent so much time on it, and it was a good idea, right?
Did you come away thinking that investment banks deliberately underprice IPOs because they want that one-day pop because that's considered successful?
I would know
No?
my paper at the time, based on the sample back then, was that it was the market that overvalued them after the initial offering. They got
Yeah.
too excited about it, which
Right.
explains that long run underperformance.
Interesting.
So,
it's
yeah.
something new, it's shiny, we're going to run to it.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting.
I mean, certainly it wouldn't be in the best interest to underprice anything, right? But you want to make sure that it's successful.
Sure.
So anyway, but I didn't do any more valuation research after that, which, you know how sometimes things happen in life and you think it's the end of the world, like you just are like,
Yes.
that is the end of my career, like that. My life is, I had lost so much sleep over that. But you know what? It ended up being a really good thing in hindsight, because it actually shifted out of valuation research. Not only because of that, but I realized that was a really tough area, and it's accounting and finance mixed together. There are a lot of players in that field. And I ended up shifting to the nonprofit area, where very few researchers were doing work in that area, despite how important they are to the economy. There were so many fundamental questions that hadn't been answered yet in the nonprofit arena that I was able to get in there and make huge contributions on my papers. And it was a little challenging getting them published at first, because the journals were reluctant to publish, because they wanted to publish the mainstream stuff. So it was a little bit of an uphill battle initially, but I was able to become a big fish in a small pond, so to speak, and make a lot of contributions, a lot of huge contributions rather than marginal incremental contributions in my research. So
what would you say is your most significant discovery in all the years of research that you've done?
My first nonprofit paper that I worked on, and I have co-authors on all my papers,
Sure.
Was that it was a follow-on to a governmental accounting office report that reported that nonprofits, half of nonprofits were reporting zero fundraising expenses. So let me give you a little background here.
Yeah.
Nonprofits, they don't care about bottom line net income, right? What their reports show is how they spend their money, how they spend their funds. And so they're required on their IRS Form 990, which is the publicly available information return that donors or stakeholders use to assess nonprofits. They're required to take all of their expense line items like compensation, rent, and allocate it across 3 areas: administrative, fundraising, and programs. Program is the charitable mission. So they have an incentive to report in the program area, right? Because as a donor, what you care about when you give $1 is, are you using my dollar to feed the hungry?
Right.
Or are you using
Feed
my dollar
yourself.
for the charitable mission? Or are you using it for administrative purposes?
Yeah.
Or are you spending a lot of money to get that dollar from me? That's not what
Right.
donors want. They want their money to go towards charitable purpose. So nonprofits have to allocate their expenses across those 3 categories. And this GAO report and other anecdotal evidence in the press and stuff would say, what's up? These nonprofits, there's many nonprofits out there reporting 0. Now that's not academic research, right? That's just an anecdotal fact there. So my co-authors and I, we were like, okay, we need to better understand this 0 reporting. Do they really have fundraising expenses, or are they misreporting here? So, so in that paper, it's hard to prove whether they're misreporting or not, because you got to know what the truth is. So how do you
Right.
figure out what the truth is? So we went about it a couple of ways. One, we did two ways on this paper. One was we looked at their websites for evidence of fundraising costs. Like, do they have a fundraising director? Do they is there evidence of activities that would be associated with costs? And if they're reporting zero on their 990, but their website suggests that they're doing fundraising activities, that doesn't tie.
Right.
Then the second thing we do is we went to some nonprofits, not all, but some nonprofits have their financial statements audited. There's no universal requirement that nonprofits have audited financial statements, but some of them had it. We were able to get a sample of nonprofit financial statements, and on those financial statements, the audited ones, they would report fundraising expenses, whereas on the publicly available 990, they didn't. So that's pretty definite evidence that there's misreporting. So then, more importantly, we asked, is this intentional? Is this intentional misreporting, or do they just not know what they're doing filling out this 990? So that we had to think about, all right, how do we show this is intentional? So we built on the research that showed that both compensation and donations are both associated with this program ratio. The program ratio is the program expenses divided by total expenses. So if you're a manager at a nonprofit and you know that the donations that you receive or the compensation that you're going to be paid is a function of this program ratio, that's going to increase your incentive to manipulate it, right? So we show that we develop a measure of the incentive to misreport based on that association, and then we find that that was correlated with the misreporting, so, and suggesting that they were intentionally misreporting.
Deliberately doing it.
Right.
To lower the actual cost of...
To make them look more attractive to donors. Yeah,
right, because for a time there were a lot of measurements of the charities or nonprofits that spent the least amount of money to administer the funds and got the most amount of money to the people in need, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And so that became a new way to judge nonprofits, in fact. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one is what they're actually doing, but the other is the reporting.
Right.
Right. If you're a donor and you can't observe
Yeah.
what they're doing directly, then you don't know. You have to go to these reports
Right.
and say, let me pull the 990. And some donors will pull the 990s, and others, they get it from watchdogs. There's watchdogs out there that report on these ratios, but the watchdogs get it from the 990 too.
Right.
So indirectly, the donors are getting it from the 990. And so, the question is that 990 accurate or not? And it's, yeah.
As an aside, 990s, the filing requirements must really be screwy, because sometimes you can go in there and look for one, and they're 2 years old, the latest one filed.
Right.
How can that be?
Right. No,
there's no enforcement.
Right. This is one of the things that really surprised me most when I got into the nonprofit accounting research was how different it is from corporate accounting. And nonprofits are really important. They represent about 6% of our GDP. They employ 10% of our workforce, and over half the population gives to nonprofits, and annual giving is like, $500 billion annually. So these are really important things. And if donors don't have the right information about a nonprofit, then donations are being misallocated.
Yep.
Right? So there are really important policy implications here about this. I mean, it's only been 25 years that you could even get a 990. It was the Tax Act in, I think it was 97 that said nonprofits have to give you their 990. Wow. Before that, you couldn't get them.
Wow.
It's only been 25 years that you could even get that. And then even when you do get them, there's delays, big delays. The IRS takes a long time to process the data. It got even worse during the pandemic. So delays in getting the data, and then the data's not accurate. A lot of my research shows that they're not reporting this correctly. It's not high quality reporting. I mean, some organizations have high quality reporting, but there's a lot of really low quality reporting. And the IRS isn't auditing them because there's no tax due on them.
Right.
Right? It's not a tax return, it's an informational return. They're short on resources, so they're not auditing these. And the last thing is what I wanted to talk about was the governance. So, because I was just talking about the difference between for-profit and nonprofit firms and how striking the differences are. For-profit firms have to follow specific governance procedures per Sarbanes-Oxley. Nonprofits don't. It wasn't until 2008 that they even had to report on their governance. Before that, we didn't know how they were governed. So you give your donations to a nonprofit, you don't know how they're governed. You don't know, even if they're reporting spending on the charitable mission, you don't know if they're being effective in it, right?
True.
So governance kind of ties into that effectiveness. So
that's how your research evolved into essentially governance of the organizations as well.
Right, yeah. After I did the study on the misreporting, that cascaded into many other research questions that in the for-profit literature had been answered by hundreds of studies. This is what I was talking about earlier. I lucked my way into an area had less explored, and there were a lot of big questions on the table, that hadn't been answered, that I was able to be one of the first in answering some of these questions. And so a natural follow-up question to that, nonprofits misreport their information is, there were several obvious questions after that, but one was, what explains the cross-sectional differences in reporting quality? How does governance play into that? What types of governance work? What types of governance don't work? And that's important. Those have policy implications too, right? It's like, do audit committees, does board independence, do audits, reviews, what helps feed into this positive financial reporting quality, high quality? Yeah.
So your study of nonprofits over the course of your career, does it give you a positive view of the nonprofit world, or does it give you a more skeptical view of the nonprofit world and how it operates and is managed?
Well, I mean, it varies greatly, right? I mean, we have, I forgot the number, but I wrote it down, many I had millions of nonprofits out there, right?
Yes.
So, many of them,
like Girl Scouts of America,
many of them are very well
Salvation
run.
Army
Right.
are among the best organizations as far as we know, right?
Yeah. Well, my research is large scale empirical research, so I'm not pointing my finger at any particular one. Okay. It's not case-based. But there are many nonprofits that are very well governed and report accurate, or what appears to be high quality reporting. But then there's also a lot that just don't even seem to know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So I have a recent study, and I think, it's because there's a lot of really small nonprofits there. And obviously we can't ask all nonprofits to go get financial statement audits.
Right.
It's very expensive, right? So I'm not suggesting that they do. But some of these nonprofits don't have any idea of how to fill out a 990. I just did my most recent study looks at asset diversion. So this is like theft, either within the organization or by an outsider stealing from the organization, and asset misappropriation. And so starting in 2008, nonprofits had to check a box on the main form of the 990 indicating whether they had an asset misappropriation or not. And if they did, they're supposed to go fill out a Schedule O. Now, the instructions are very clear on what an asset misappropriation is and what information they need to fill out on the Schedule O. So my co-authors and I collected a lot of these asset diversions because we wanted to try to better understand whether donors use these disclosures or not, and whether donors punished organizations with asset diversions. So 5% of the organization would check a box that they had an asset diversion, but when you read the description, it wasn't an asset diversion at all. They would say, oh, we sold a building. Oh. It's like, That's not an asset diversion.
Wow.
That would be a sale of a building. Like,
Yeah.
An asset diversion is theft, right? So that's 5% of our sample. And these are the larger nonprofits we looked at. This is nonprofits that had at least $10,000 in donations.
Right.
And then even those that did have an asset diversion, 20% of them didn't even fill out the Schedule O. So they didn't provide you
Wow.
they didn't follow the instructions, and then another half of them didn't follow the instructions and provide the pertinent information.
This goes to your point about the unreliability of the disclosure.
Right. But so what's really cool about my
Wow.
research is I show, and this has policy implications because there was a lot of controversy about the revised Form 990. Those against it said, we don't need more disclosure. Donors aren't going to use this. They're not going to go dig back into the Schedule O. My research finds that they do. So if organizations that were more transparent about their asset diversion were punished less by donors than those that weren't transparent. So transparency, if you have an asset diversion and you're transparent about it, you provide information about it, you provide information about what you've done to follow up, about internal control improvements, you're not going to be punished. If you don't, it's kind of like a Lemons problem. Donors are going to assume the worst, and you're going to get punished more.
Fascinating.
So that was pretty cool study. Well, we haven't published it yet, but it's close, very close. So.
Now, I know that you teach the core course in financial accounting for MBAs.
Right.
And more recently, you've had an administrative role here as a senior associate dean for academic affairs. So I wonder, that must have put a lot of pressure on your ability to do more research, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
So in addition to the study you just mentioned, is there something else that's even more current that is not quite ready for publication?
Unfortunately, right now I only have 2 studies. No, I have 3. I take that back. I have 3. Yeah, no, I have 3 studies, which and 2 are further along at the journals. So I've been managing to find some time to do it. But it has been tough over the last 4.5 years being in the dean's office. Part of it was that we had this pandemic in the midst of it as well.
Of course. And that was no easy thing to navigate through.
Right. And but I've really enjoyed being in the dean's office. But I told Rao, I said I have to get back out because I got to get back to my research. Yeah. So So
do you have one burning issue you'd love to explore once you leave this post?
There's a huge, and I don't know how to answer it, but the big thing in nonprofits that we as donors really need to be able to understand is effectiveness of a nonprofit. How do we measure effectiveness? So we can look at the 990, and I talked a little bit about looking at how they spend money. So do they spend on their programs? But just because you spend on your programs doesn't mean that you're effective. Like think of a food bank. If they go buy a bunch of food, but they don't actually get it to the hungry people, then they're not being effective, right? Just because they spend the money doesn't mean that they're effective. And so,
boy, that's going to be hard to measure.
Well, it is hard to measure because all nonprofits are different. Yeah. And there's some stuff out there that. There's some reporting out there. I think it would be hard to do a large scale study across all industries. I'd have to start with a sub industry, but it would really be useful to try to figure that out. I do have another study where we're looking at volunteers as a measure of nonprofit effectiveness. I know that sounds a little odd, but if you think about it,
you can engage more people to do the work.
I'm not going to volunteer for an organization that's not effective.
True.
And so we're trying to measure what volunteers can tell us about effectiveness in an organization. So
interesting.
That research is a little bit earlier, so I'm not, I don't really have a lot of details to talk about on that particular paper yet, But the idea is, why would you volunteer for an organization if you didn't
believe in it?
Believe in it. That's different than donating because you're as a donor, you're on the outside. You can't see what's going on as much on the inside, but volunteers can see more. So,
obviously, you've chosen a life where intellectual curiosity is
Yeah.
at the center
Yeah.
of your life.
Yeah.
And maybe it's made you curious about everything
Yeah.
in a positive way.
Yeah, I mean, I do find myself at this point in my life as definitely a lot more interested in much more personal growth and development.
Yeah,
I think I have more space for that now
yeah,
than I did, when I was a junior faculty member. That also might be a function of my age, right? It might have happened. I don't know if this would have happened. Well, probably wouldn't have happened. Actually, when I go back home to my siblings, they're nothing like me in that way. So yeah, I think that this career has. I didn't really realize while I was in it. I mean, I'm no longer married to an academic, but I was married to an academic. He's on the faculty here, and we did even some of this research together, and we have a great working relationship still, but we're not married anymore. But being married to him and being an academic, I just had this very narrow world. Like I was just, and now having gotten out of that, I realize how really lucky I am. I mean, my circle of people have changed, right? And I see kind of how people outside of academics are living, and we really have it good. I mean, we get to study for a living. If I don't like a project, I drop it.
Yeah.
Right?
and to think for a living.
Exactly, and teach. I mean, I feel like it keeps me young, teaching. We get to travel, go present papers. We get paid to go listen to other people's ideas and give them feedback if we want. So it's a great career. I mean, I feel very lucky that I somehow stumbled upon this career.
Indeed.
So yeah.
Well, Shelley, thank you very much for spending your
Yeah.
time with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. Thanks.
All right, I'm John Byrne with Poets and Quants. You've been watching our Thought Leadership series at the Graduate School of Management at UC Davis in California. We're exploring the ideas, the passions, and the motivations of some of the best faculty here. Watch our other episodes. There are 10 of them in all. I'll see you in every one of them. Thanks for watching.